Picture this, a massive crowd of thousands, stage lights blazing, cameras rolling, and one of Hollywood's biggest stars about to make a decision that would leave everyone in tears. Kevin Costner, the man who brought us Dances with Wolves and Field of Dreams, was standing at the center of it all when he spotted someone in the audience who had once saved his life. What happened next wasn't scripted, wasn't planned, and certainly wasn't something anyone expected to witness that night. Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we least expect them. Sometimes gratitude finds a way to break through the noise of fame, fortune, and flashbulbs to remind us what really matters. This is the story of how a single act of kindness years earlier came full circle in the most beautiful way possible, proving that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they're sitting quietly in the audience, never expecting recognition for the day they changed someone's world forever. What you're about to read isn't just another celebrity story. It's a reminder that behind every famous face is a human being who remembers the people who helped them along the way. It's about the power of recognizing those who made our success possible, and the magic that happens when gratitude takes center stage. The year was 1982, and Kevin Costner was nobody special in Hollywood. Just another face in the crowd of wannabe actors waiting tables, taking odd jobs, and sleeping on friends' couches while chasing a dream that seemed to get further away with each passing day. The rejection letters piled up on his small apartment table like autumn leaves, each one a reminder that maybe his parents had been right about getting a real job. Kevin had been living in Los Angeles for 3 years, and the money his father had reluctantly given him was long gone. His college degree in business administration sat unused in a drawer while he spent his days driving from audition to audition in a beat-up Honda Civic that had seen better days. The car's air conditioning had died the previous summer, and with California's heat bearing down mercilessly, those long drives between casting calls became torture sessions that tested his resolve daily. Most mornings started the same way. Kevin would wake up in his studio apartment in North Hollywood, a place so small that his bed doubled as his living room couch. The walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbor's television through the night, and the single window faced a brick wall that blocked out most of the natural light. He would make instant coffee with water heated in the microwave, review the casting notices he'd circled in Variety magazine, and prepare for another day of being told he wasn't quite right for the part. The competition was fierce in those days. Every casting call brought dozens of young men who looked remarkably similar, tall, athletic, with that all-American charm that casting directors seemed to love. Kevin knew he fit the type, but so did everyone else in the room. What he didn't have was the connections, the agent, or the lucky break that seemed to come so easily to others. He watched as actors he'd met in waiting rooms landed roles in television shows or commercials while he remained stuck in the same cycle of auditions and rejections. Money was always tight. Kevin had taken a job at a restaurant in West Hollywood, working dinner shifts that allowed him to attend auditions during the day. The work was demanding, and the tips barely covered his rent, let alone the gas money needed to drive across the city for casting calls. He learned to survive on ramen noodles and whatever leftover food he could take home from the restaurant. His wardrobe consisted of 3 different outfits that he rotated for auditions, carefully maintained to look fresh despite being worn repeatedly. The loneliness was perhaps the hardest part. Kevin had left behind everything familiar in Kansas: his family, his girlfriend, his college friends who had all moved on to traditional careers. In Los Angeles, friendships felt temporary and competitive. Everyone was networking, everyone was hustling, and genuine connections were rare. He spent most evenings alone in his apartment, reading scripts or watching television, wondering if he was fooling himself about his talent and his chances. His family back home wasn't particularly supportive of his chosen path. His father, a utility company executive, had always emphasized the importance of financial stability and practical career choices. Regular phone calls home became exercises in defending his decision to pursue acting, with his father repeatedly suggesting it was time to grow up and get serious about life. His mother was more understanding, but worried constantly about his well-being, sending care packages filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes that sometimes made him feel worse rather than better. The entertainment industry in the early 1980s was a different world than it is today. There was no internet to research casting directors or submit headshots electronically. Everything was done in person, through the mail, or via telephone calls to agents who rarely returned messages from unknown actors. Kevin would spend hours in his car driving to different parts of the city, often for auditions that lasted less than 5 minutes. The rejection was usually swift and impersonal, a simple thank you followed by "we'll be in touch," which everyone knew meant no. As autumn turned to winter in 1982, Kevin found himself at a crossroads. The restaurant where he worked was struggling financially, and his shifts were being cut back. His Honda Civic had developed a troubling engine noise that he couldn't afford to have diagnosed, let alone repaired. His savings account, never substantial to begin with, had dwindled to less than $200. The pressure to give up and return home was mounting, not just from his family, but from his own growing doubts about whether he had what it took to make it in Hollywood. It was during this period of uncertainty that Kevin made a decision that would change everything. He had heard about a new acting workshop being offered by a respected coach who had worked with several successful television actors. The cost was steep, nearly half of his remaining money, but something inside him knew this might be his last real chance to improve his craft and make meaningful connections in the industry. The workshop was intensive, meeting 3 times a week for 6 weeks, and it promised to provide not just training but also opportunities to showcase talent in front of industry professionals. The decision to spend that money wasn't easy. It meant surviving on even less, possibly having to ask his parents for help, and definitely putting his already precarious financial situation at greater risk. But Kevin had reached a point where playing it safe felt more dangerous than taking the risk. He was tired of being just another face in the crowd, tired of auditions where he felt unprepared and unsuccessful. If he was going to fail, he wanted to fail knowing he had given everything he had to offer. The night before the workshop began, Kevin sat in his small apartment looking out at the brick wall that had become so familiar. He thought about all the dreams he'd carried with him from Kansas, all the movies that had inspired him to want to tell stories, all the characters he imagined himself bringing to life on screen. The fear of failure was real and constant, but the fear of giving up felt even worse. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of what he hoped would be a new chapter in his struggling career. He had no way of knowing that this decision to invest in himself, despite his dire financial circumstances, would lead him to meet the person who would change not just his career, but potentially save his life. Sometimes the most important moments begin with the smallest steps forward, even when we can't see where the path is leading. The acting workshop was held in a converted warehouse space in Burbank, the kind of industrial building that had been transformed into dozens of small studios and rehearsal rooms. Kevin arrived early on the first day, nervous energy making it impossible for him to stay home any longer. The parking lot was filled with cars much nicer than his aging Honda, and he felt that familiar pang of insecurity that came with being surrounded by people who seemed to have their lives more together than he did. Inside, the space was sparse but functional. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, a small stage area marked off with tape on the concrete floor, and fluorescent lights that cast everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. About 20 other actors had enrolled in the workshop, and as Kevin looked around the room, he recognized the same mixture of hope and desperation that he saw in his own mirror every morning. These were his people, the dreamers, the struggling artists, the ones who hadn't given up yet despite every reason to do so. The workshop instructor, Margaret Chun, was a woman in her 50s who commanded immediate respect. She had worked as a casting director for 15 years before transitioning to teaching, and her reputation for helping actors break through their limitations was well established in certain circles. Margaret didn't believe in coddling her students or offering false encouragement. She was known for her direct feedback and her ability to see potential even when actors couldn't see it in themselves. During the first session, Margaret had each participant perform a short monologue they had prepared. Kevin had chosen a piece from Death of a Salesman, thinking it would showcase his dramatic range. As he stood in front of the group and began to speak, he felt the familiar rush of adrenaline mixed with terror that came with performing. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the intimacy of the setting, or maybe it was the knowledge that he had invested his last real money in this opportunity. But Kevin found himself more connected to the material than he had ever been before. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment before Margaret nodded approvingly. "That was honest," she said simply. But, coming from her, it felt like the highest praise possible. Around the circle, Kevin noticed one person in particular who seemed to be paying especially close attention to his performance. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, well-dressed in a way that suggested success in the business, with kind eyes and an encouraging smile. During the break, this man approached Kevin with a confidence that immediately put him at ease. "I'm Richard Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "I caught your monologue in there. Really powerful work." Richard explained that he was a talent agent with a small, but respected agency that specialized in representing emerging actors. He wasn't there as a student, but as Margaret's guest, someone she occasionally invited to observe her workshops and identify promising new talent. The conversation that followed would change the trajectory of Kevin's entire career. Richard had an eye for spotting actors who possessed that indefinable quality that separated working performers from stars, and he saw something in Kevin that even Kevin didn't yet recognize in himself. They talked for nearly an hour during that break, discussing Kevin's background, his training, his goals, and his struggles with the industry. Richard listened with the kind of attention that Kevin hadn't experienced from anyone in the business before. What impressed Richard most wasn't just Kevin's talent, which was evident, but his work ethic and his genuine passion for the craft. In an industry filled with people who wanted to be famous, Richard recognized someone who actually wanted to be an actor. Kevin talked about characters he wanted to play, stories he wanted to tell, and the emotional truth he hoped to bring to his performances. This wasn't someone looking for the easy path to celebrity. This was someone willing to do the work required to become genuinely skilled at his craft. By the end of that first workshop session, Richard had offered to represent Kevin. It wasn't a guarantee of immediate success, but it was the break Kevin had been hoping for since arriving in Los Angeles. Having representation meant access to auditions that weren't publicly posted, feedback from someone who understood the industry, and, most importantly, someone who believed in his potential enough to invest time and effort in his career. The partnership that developed over the following weeks was unlike anything Kevin had experienced in the entertainment industry. Richard wasn't just an agent. He became a mentor, a strategist, and eventually a friend. He helped Kevin refine his audition technique, connected him with photographers for better headshots, and began submitting him for roles that actually matched his strengths as an actor. For the first time since arriving in Los Angeles, Kevin felt like he had an ally in his corner. Richard's approach to representation was refreshingly honest. He didn't promise overnight success or try to manage Kevin's expectations with false optimism. Instead, he laid out a realistic timeline for building a career, explained the steps necessary to move from unknown actor to working professional, and prepared Kevin for the long-term commitment required to achieve lasting success. This honesty was exactly what Kevin needed. Not more encouragement, but a clear understanding of what lay ahead. Within a month of signing with Richard's agency, Kevin began booking small roles that actually paid decent money. A commercial for a local car dealership, a day player role on a television series, and a supporting part in a low-budget independent film that would never see wide release but provided valuable experience and a credit for his resume. None of these jobs were glamorous, but they represented forward momentum in a career that had been stalled for far too long. More importantly, Richard began introducing Kevin to other industry professionals who could help his career. A casting director who specialized in television pilots, a director who was known for working with new talent, and a producer who was always looking for fresh faces for his projects. These weren't casual introductions at parties. They were strategic meetings designed to help Kevin build the network of relationships that successful actors need to sustain long-term careers. The workshop continued to be a source of growth and learning for Kevin throughout this period. Margaret Chin pushed all her students to dig deeper into their emotional truth, to find the personal connections that would make their performances more authentic and powerful. Kevin discovered aspects of his own personality and emotional life that he had never explored before, both as a person and as an actor. This deeper self-awareness began to show up in his audition work, making him more compelling and memorable to casting directors. As winter turned to spring, Kevin's life began to change in ways both small and significant. He was able to move into a better apartment, nothing luxurious, but a place with actual windows and a separate bedroom. He bought some new clothes for additions and, finally, got his car repaired. Most importantly, he began to feel like a professional actor rather than someone pretending to be one. The constant anxiety about money lessened, replaced by a different kind of pressure, the responsibility to live up to Richard's investment in his potential. Richard often invited Kevin to industry events where he could meet other professionals and learn more about the business side of entertainment. It was at one of these gatherings that Kevin first heard Richard mention his own health struggles. In passing, almost casually, Richard mentioned that he had been dealing with some medical issues that required regular monitoring. Kevin didn't think much of it at the time. Richard seemed healthy and energetic, and the comment was made in the context of explaining why he couldn't attend a particular event. What Kevin didn't realize was that this casual mention of health problems was Richard's way of downplaying something much more serious. Richard had been dealing with heart problems for several months, a condition that his doctors were monitoring closely but that hadn't yet required dramatic intervention. Richard was the type of person who didn't like to burden others with his personal problems, preferring to focus on helping his clients achieve their goals rather than dwelling on his own challenges. The relationship between Kevin and Richard had evolved far beyond the typical agent-client dynamic. They had become genuine friends who enjoyed each other's company and respected each other's perspectives on life and career. Kevin valued Richard's wisdom and experience, while Richard appreciated Kevin's authenticity and dedication to his craft. Neither of them could have predicted that this professional relationship would soon become something much more profound, or that Kevin would soon have the opportunity to return the support and care that Richard had shown him from their very first meeting. It was a Thursday afternoon in late spring when Kevin received the phone call that would test everything he thought he knew about friendship, loyalty, and what it means to be there for someone when they need you most. He had just returned from a particularly good audition for a recurring role on a popular television series, feeling optimistic about his chances and grateful for how much his career had progressed since meeting Richard 6 months earlier. The phone rang as he was making himself a late lunch, celebrating the audition with something more elaborate than his usual peanut butter sandwich. When he answered, expecting it might be Richard calling with feedback about the audition or news about another opportunity, he was surprised to hear an unfamiliar voice on the other end. The caller identified herself as Jennifer, Richard's assistant, and there was something in her tone that immediately made Kevin's stomach tighten with concern. "Kevin," she said, her voice carefully controlled but clearly shaken, "I'm calling to let you know that Richard is in the hospital. He had a heart attack this morning during a meeting with clients." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before their full meaning hit him. Heart attack. Hospital. Richard, who had been so full of energy and plans just 2 days earlier when they had lunch together, was now fighting for his life. Jennifer explained that Richard had collapsed suddenly during what should have been a routine meeting at his office. His assistant had immediately called for emergency medical help, and paramedics had arrived within minutes, but Richard had been unconscious when they transported him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The doctors were still running tests and evaluating his condition, but the initial prognosis was serious. They wouldn't know more until the cardiac specialists completed their assessment. Kevin felt the world shift beneath his feet as he absorbed this information. Richard wasn't just his agent. He had become the most important mentor and friend Kevin had found in Los Angeles. The thought of losing him was devastating, but beyond his personal feelings, Kevin realized that Richard had no immediate family in the area. His parents lived in Chicago, his ex-wife had moved to New York after their divorce, and his adult children were scattered across the country pursuing their own careers. Without hesitation, Kevin drove immediately to the hospital. The cardiovascular intensive care unit was a maze of beeping machines, antiseptic smells, and hushed conversations between medical professionals who moved with practiced urgency. When Kevin finally located Richard's room, he was shocked by what he saw. The vibrant, energetic man who had become such an important part of his life was lying unconscious, connected to multiple machines that monitored his vital signs and supported his breathing. A doctor emerged from the room just as Kevin arrived, and After confirming that Kevin was indeed Richard's emergency contact, she explained the severity of the situation. Richard had suffered what medical professionals call a massive myocardial infarction, a heart attack that had damaged a significant portion of his heart muscle. He was stable for the moment, but the next 48 hours would be critical in determining his long-term prognosis and recovery potential. Kevin made a decision that surprised even himself. Rather than returning home to wait for updates, he chose to stay at the hospital. He called the restaurant where he still worked occasional shifts to explain his absence, canceled his other additions for the week, and settled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair beside Richard's bed. Something inside him knew that Richard needed to know he wasn't alone during this fight for his life. The first night was the longest of Kevin's life. Richard remained unconscious, breathing with the assistance of a ventilator, while machines continuously monitored his heart rhythm and other vital signs. Nurses came and went throughout the night, checking his condition, adjusting medications, and making notes in his chart. Kevin tried to read, tried to sleep in the chair, but mostly he just sat there talking to Richard, hoping that somehow his presence might make a difference. By the second day, Kevin had established a routine that would continue for the next several weeks. He would arrive at the hospital early each morning, spend the entire day by Richard's bedside, and return to his apartment only late at night to shower and get a few hours of sleep. He brought books to read, scripts to study, and his portable cassette player with headphones so he could listen to music without disturbing other patients or staff. The medical team was initially puzzled by Kevin's constant presence, assuming he must be a family member. When they learned he was simply a friend and client, their respect for his dedication was evident. Dr. Martinez, the cardiologist overseeing Richard's care, took the time to explain each development in Richard's condition, appreciating that Kevin genuinely cared about understanding the medical complexities of heart attack recovery. During those long days and nights, Kevin began to understand the depth of Richard's impact on the lives of others. A steady stream of visitors came by to check on his condition. Other actors Richard represented, industry professionals who respected his integrity and kindness, and friends from various parts of his life. Kevin met Richard's parents when they flew in from Chicago, grateful elderly people who were heartbroken to see their son in such a precarious condition. It was during the second week of Richard's hospitalization that the most frightening moment occurred. Kevin was reading quietly beside the bed when the heart monitor began emitting a rapid, urgent beeping sound. Within seconds, the room filled with medical personnel responding to what they called a cardiac event. Richard's heart had gone into a dangerous, irregular rhythm that could be fatal if not corrected immediately. Kevin was quickly ushered from the room as doctors and nurses worked to stabilize Richard's condition using medications and electrical cardioversion to restore his normal heart rhythm. For nearly an hour, Kevin paced the hallway outside, praying to whatever forces might be listening that his friend would survive this latest crisis. When Dr. Martinez finally emerged to tell him that Richard was stable again, Kevin felt his own knees go weak with relief. That night, as Kevin sat once again by Richard's bedside, something remarkable happened. Richard's eyes fluttered open for the first time since the initial heart attack, and although he couldn't speak due to the breathing tube, his eyes found Kevin's face and registered recognition. The relief and gratitude Kevin saw in Richard's expression was overwhelming, and he found himself crying for the first time since this nightmare had begun. Over the following days, as Richard's condition gradually improved and he was able to breathe on his own again, the full scope of Kevin's dedication became clear to everyone involved in his care. Kevin had essentially put his own life on hold to ensure that Richard wasn't alone during the most vulnerable time of his life. He had missed auditions, lost income from his restaurant job, and spent every available moment providing the kind of support that usually comes only from immediate family members. When Richard was finally able to speak again, the first words he whispered were, "Thank you." But Kevin could see in his eyes that those simple words carried the weight of profound gratitude for someone who had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier and more practical. Richard later told Kevin that during his periods of semi-consciousness, knowing that someone was there beside his bed had given him the strength to keep fighting when giving up would have been so much easier. The doctors eventually determined that Richard would recover, though he would need significant lifestyle changes and ongoing medical monitoring. His career as a talent agent would need to be scaled back considerably, at least temporarily, as he focused on regaining his health and strength. For Kevin, this meant losing not just his representative, but also his closest friend and mentor in the industry, at least for the foreseeable future. But what had happened during those weeks at the hospital had changed both men in ways they were only beginning to understand. Kevin had discovered reserves of loyalty and compassion within himself that he hadn't known existed. Richard had experienced the kind of friendship that most people only dream of having, someone willing to sacrifice their own interests to provide comfort and support during a life-threatening crisis. As Richard began his long recovery process, both men understood that their relationship had evolved far beyond professional representation or even ordinary friendship. They had become something closer to family, bound together by an experience that had tested and revealed the very best in both of them. Neither could have predicted that this experience would one day come full circle in a way that would touch the hearts of people around the world. Richard's recovery was slow but steady, requiring months of cardiac rehabilitation, dietary changes, and a complete restructuring of his previously high-stress lifestyle. Kevin continued to visit him regularly, though now at Richard's apartment rather than the hospital. They would spend hours talking about life, career goals, and the perspective that comes from facing mortality at a relatively young age. Richard often said that his heart attack, devastating as it was, had taught him to appreciate the things that truly mattered: relationships, health, and the simple pleasure of being alive. During this period, Kevin found himself in an unusual position professionally. While Richard was recovering, Kevin needed new representation, but the experience of nearly losing his friend and mentor had changed his priorities significantly. The cutthroat competition and superficial relationships that characterized so much of the entertainment industry seemed less appealing than they had before. He wanted to work with people who understood that success meant more than just advancing one's career at any cost. Richard, even while recovering, refused to let Kevin's career stagnate. From his apartment, he made phone calls to other agents and casting directors, enthusiastically recommending Kevin for opportunities and sharing his belief that Kevin had the talent and character to achieve lasting success in the industry. These recommendations carried significant weight because of Richard's reputation for integrity and his track record of identifying genuinely talented actors. Through one of Richard's referrals, Kevin eventually signed with Patricia Wolf, a respected agent who specialized in representing actors making the transition from struggling unknowns to working professionals. Patricia had heard about Kevin's dedication to Richard during his hospitalization, and she was impressed by someone who clearly understood loyalty and commitment, qualities that were often in short supply in Hollywood. Under Patricia's guidance, Kevin's career began to accelerate in ways he had never imagined possible. Within 6 months of signing with her agency, he landed a supporting role in a major motion picture, his first significant film credit. The movie was a romantic drama starring established Hollywood actors, and while Kevin's role was relatively small, it gave him the opportunity to work with experienced professionals and learn from their approach to the craft. The filming experience was revelatory for Kevin. He discovered that his years of struggle, combined with the emotional growth that had come from supporting Richard through his health crisis, had given him a depth and authenticity as an actor that younger, less experienced performers often lacked. Directors and fellow actors noticed his professionalism, his preparation, and his ability to bring genuine emotion to his scenes without overacting or forcing moments that needed to feel natural. As the 1980s progressed, Kevin's career gained momentum with each project. He booked guest roles on popular television series, supporting parts in films that received critical acclaim, and eventually leading roles in smaller independent movies that showcased his range as an actor. Critics began to notice his work, describing him as an actor with natural charisma and authentic American charm that felt refreshing in an industry often criticized for its artificiality. Throughout this period of professional growth, Kevin maintained his close friendship with Richard, who had gradually returned to work on a limited basis. Richard's health had stabilized, though he would never again work at the frenetic pace that had characterized his pre-heart attack life. Instead, He focused on a smaller roster of clients whom he genuinely believed in, providing more personal attention and strategic career guidance than he had been able to offer when managing a larger agency. The late 1980s brought Kevin's first major breakthrough role in a film called The Untouchables, where he played Elliot Ness alongside Sean Connery and Robert De Niro. The movie was both a critical and commercial success, establishing Kevin as a leading man capable of carrying major Hollywood productions. The role showcased his ability to play heroic characters with complexity and moral conviction, traits that would become hallmarks of his most successful performances. Success brought new challenges and opportunities that Kevin had never anticipated. Suddenly, he was being offered multiple projects simultaneously, magazine covers wanted to feature him, and his personal life became a subject of public interest. The transition from struggling actor to movie star was both thrilling and overwhelming, requiring him to navigate fame while maintaining the values and relationships that had sustained him during his difficult early years in Los Angeles. Richard, despite his reduced professional capacity, became an invaluable advisor during this transition. Having worked with successful actors throughout his career, he helped Kevin understand how to handle the pressures of fame, the importance of choosing roles that would build a lasting career rather than just capitalize on immediate popularity, and the necessity of surrounding himself with people who valued him as a person rather than just a commodity. The early 1990s brought Kevin's career-defining moment with Dances with Wolves, a passion project he had spent years trying to bring to the screen. The film was ambitious in scope and deeply personal to Kevin, who not only starred in it, but also directed and produced it. Many industry professionals were skeptical about the commercial prospects of a 3-hour Western that treated Native American culture with respect and complexity rarely seen in Hollywood productions. When Dances with Wolves became both a massive commercial success and an Academy Award winner for Best Picture, with Kevin winning the Oscar for Best Director, his transformation from struggling actor to A-list Hollywood star was complete. The film's success opened doors to projects that allowed him to work with the most respected directors, producers, and actors in the industry, while also establishing him as a filmmaker capable of bringing his own vision to the screen. Throughout his rise to stardom, Kevin never forgot the people who had helped him during his struggling years, particularly Richard. Even as his fame grew and his schedule became increasingly demanding, Kevin made time for the friendship that had meant so much during the most difficult period of his life. They would have dinner regularly, attend industry events together when Richard felt up to it, and maintain the kind of genuine personal connection that often becomes difficult to sustain in the entertainment industry. Richard, for his part, took tremendous pride in Kevin's success, not just as a former agent, but as a friend who had watched someone he cared about achieve their dreams through talent, hard work, and genuine character. He often said that watching Kevin's career flourish was one of the most rewarding experiences of his professional life, made even more meaningful by their personal friendship and shared history. As the 1990s continued, Kevin's career reached heights that few actors ever achieve. He starred in blockbuster films like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and The Bodyguard, worked with legendary directors, and became one of the most recognizable and bankable stars in Hollywood. His success allowed him to be selective about his projects, choosing roles that interested him personally, and working with people he respected professionally. The financial success that came with stardom also allowed Kevin to give back in ways that reflected his values and experiences. He became involved in various charitable organizations, particularly those focused on healthcare and supporting struggling artists. His own experience of nearly losing Richard to a heart attack had made him acutely aware of how quickly life could change and how important it was to use success to help others. Despite his fame and fortune, Kevin remained essentially the same person who had sat by Richard's hospital bed for weeks, choosing loyalty and friendship over personal convenience. Industry colleagues often commented on his down-to-earth personality, his genuine interest in other people, and his willingness to help younger actors navigate the challenges of building a career in entertainment. These qualities had been shaped by his early struggles and strengthened by his experience of supporting a friend through a life-threatening crisis. As the new millennium approached, Kevin Costner had achieved everything he had dreamed of when he first arrived in Los Angeles as an unknown actor with big hopes and very little money. But, perhaps more importantly, he had maintained his integrity and his capacity for genuine human connection despite operating in an industry that often rewarded the opposite qualities. The foundation for these values had been built during those difficult early years and reinforced through his friendship with Richard, experiences that would soon come full circle in a moment that would touch the hearts of people around the world. The year was 2015, more than 30 years after Kevin Costner had first met Richard Harrison in that acting workshop in Burbank. Kevin was now one of Hollywood's most respected actors and directors, with a career spanning decades, and including some of cinema's most memorable films. He was appearing at a special tribute event at the Beverly Hills Hotel, an evening dedicated to celebrating the careers of actors who had made significant contributions to American cinema. The event was elegant in the way that only Hollywood gatherings can be, with celebrities, industry executives, and entertainment journalists filling the grand ballroom. Kevin was being honored alongside several other actors of his generation, and the evening included film clips, speeches from directors who had worked with the honorees, and performances by musicians whose songs had been featured in their movies. It was the kind of prestigious event that represented the pinnacle of industry recognition. As Kevin sat at the head table, listening to colleagues and friends speak about his career achievements, he found his attention wandering to the audience. Over the years, he had developed a habit of scanning crowds at these events, partly out of curiosity about who was attending, but also because he genuinely enjoyed seeing familiar faces from different periods of his life. Tonight, however, his casual observation of the audience would lead to something extraordinary. In the middle section of the ballroom, about 15 rows back from the stage, Kevin spotted a face that made his heart skip a beat. Even after all these years, even with the gray hair and the lines that come with age, he recognized Richard Harrison immediately. Richard was sitting quietly with a woman Kevin assumed was his wife, applauding politely as the presentations continued. He looked healthier than Kevin had seen him in years, though still bearing the careful demeanor of someone who had learned to manage a chronic health condition. The sight of Richard in the audience brought back a flood of memories. Their first meeting at the acting workshop, the late-night phone calls about auditions and career strategies, the weeks Kevin had spent by his bedside in the hospital, and all the conversations they'd shared during Richard's recovery. Although they had remained friends over the decades, their busy lives had meant less frequent contact in recent years. Seeing Richard there tonight, supporting him at this career milestone, filled Kevin with a deep sense of gratitude and connection. When it came time for Kevin to give his acceptance speech, he approached the podium with a prepared text about the importance of perseverance, the value of collaboration in filmmaking, and his gratitude to the fans who had supported his work over the years. But, as he looked out at the audience and saw Richard's face among the crowd, he made a spontaneous decision that would change the entire